Hello everyone. Stay with us until the end, because what happens to this millionaire's pregnant wife will leave you speechless. And subscribe for more unforgettable stories of love, betrayal, and justice. Let's begin. Millionaire divorced his pregnant wife. Then a billionaire's jet arrived to take her home. Don't look back, Avery. There is nothing behind you that still belongs to you. Preston Hale's words followed her through the courthouse doors and into the rain. The hearing had ended less than 10 minutes earlier. No divorce had been finalized. No custody decision had been made. The judge had refused Preston's attempt to use an emergency motion to control where Avery could live and receive care before the baby was even born, ordered both sides to preserve marital assets, and warned him not to cancel her medical coverage while the case was pending. Preston still walked away as though he had won. Avery Rose Dalton stood beneath the courthouse archway with one hand pressed to her 8-month pregnant belly and the other wrapped around the handle of a small gray suitcase. Rain spilled from the stone roof in silver ropes, splashing across her shoes. Inside the suitcase were 2 maternity dresses, a bottle of prenatal vitamins, an ultrasound photograph, a laptop charger, and a pair of white baby shoes she had bought before she understood how completely a life could be dismantled in 72 hours. Behind her, the lobby doors opened again. Preston emerged beneath an umbrella held by his driver. His charcoal suit looked untouched by the weather. Beside him walked Sloan Mercer, Hale Executive Transport's chief communications officer, wearing a cream cashmere coat Avery recognized immediately. Christmas, 2 years earlier. Preston had fastened that coat around Avery's shoulders and whispered that pale colors made her look expensive. Now Sloan wore it like a flag planted on conquered ground. Preston stopped 3 feet away and held out a white envelope. $300, he said. Enough for a bus ticket to Montana. Avery did not take it. His eyes dropped to her stomach. For one brief second, something moved across his face. It was not tenderness. It was calculation. The judge's order keeps you on the insurance for now, he said quietly. Do not mistake that for protection. The penthouse belongs to the company, and your access ends after the 2-hour property pickup the court allowed. Your cards are frozen. Your phone account will be separated by tonight. You heard the judge, Avery said. You are not allowed to move marital money. Preston smiled. Then I suppose your attorney can spend the next month proving which money is marital. The baby shifted beneath Avery's palm, a slow roll followed by 2 hard kicks. Avery kept her face still. Sloan tilted her head. You should be grateful. Most women in your position leave with nothing. Avery finally took the envelope, not because she wanted Preston's money, but because refusing it would give him the photograph he wanted, the irrational wife rejecting help in public. Preston mistook strategy for surrender. There, he said. That was not so difficult. Then Avery's phone vibrated. Her rideshare had been canceled. The payment method attached to the account, a corporate card Preston had given her years ago, was no longer valid. She tried her personal debit card. Declined. When she opened the banking app, the account showed a balance of $14.11. A courthouse security officer stepped under the awning. His expression was apologetic. Ma'am, the pickup area is closing for a security inspection. Public rides are being redirected to the south lot. How far is that? Avery asked. About 3 blocks. I can call a cab, but they are running behind in the storm. 3 blocks would not have frightened her 6 months earlier. Now her lower back was tight. The baby was pressing low, and the rain had turned sharp with early spring cold. For the first time that day, fear reached her face. Not for herself, for her daughter. Preston saw it and leaned closer. Sign the settlement tonight, and I can make all of this stop. Avery looked at him. You mean you can stop doing it? His jaw tightened. Then the sky roared. Everyone beneath the courthouse awning turned toward the small regional airfield beyond the line of wet trees. A silver Gulf Stream descended through the clouds, its landing lights bright against the storm and a black letter C visible on its tail. Preston's smile disappeared. Sloan stepped closer to the curb. The aircraft touched down with a deep thunder that seemed to travel through the pavement. Seconds later, Avery's phone vibrated again. The message came from a number she had deleted 7 years earlier, but had never truly forgotten. I found the papers. Don't move. A car is coming for you. Avery read the words twice. Preston stared toward the runway. Why is Graham Calloway here? A black SUV turned the corner at the end of the courthouse drive. Avery tightened her hand around the suitcase. I think, she said. "He came to answer a question you hoped I would never ask." 72 hours earlier, Avery still believed a marriage could be repaired if two people were willing to sit at the same table and tell the truth. She lit 3 candles, warmed Preston's favorite rosemary chicken, and placed the newest ultrasound image beside his plate. Their daughter's heartbeat had been strong that afternoon. The technician had smiled and said the baby had Avery's stubborn habit of turning away from the camera. At 7:15, the private elevator chimed. Avery smoothed her pale blue maternity dress and opened the door. Sloan Mercer entered first in red heels, carrying a leather folder. 2 attorneys followed. Preston came last, loosening his tie as he crossed the room. He looked past the dinner, the candles, and the ultrasound without apology. "We need to handle this tonight," he said. No kiss. No question about the appointment. Sloan placed the folder on the dining table beside the unfinished wooden stars Avery planned to hang in the nursery. "What exactly are we handling?" Avery asked. One attorney opened the folder and turned the first documents toward her. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Proposed temporary financial agreement. Confidentiality provision. Intellectual property confirmation. Avery read each heading slowly while the refrigerator hummed and candle wax slid down the silver holders. Preston spoke in the calm voice he used during layoffs. "This marriage no longer supports the direction of my life or the company." Her hand moved instinctively over her belly. "Is this about Sloan?" Sloan's mouth curved, but Preston answered. "It is about compatibility. She understands the future I am building." Avery looked toward the nursery doorway. "We built that future." "You wrote the code," Preston said. "I faced the lenders, signed the guarantees, and made people believe in it. Do not confuse inventing a system with building an empire." "I did not refuse those rooms," Avery said. "You stopped inviting me." Irritation broke through his composure. In Preston's version of history, every door he closed became one she had failed to enter. He pushed the papers closer. If Avery signed within 24 hours, she could keep her clothing, personal jewelry, and enough money to rent an apartment for 3 months. She would waive any ownership interest in Hale Executive Transport beyond whatever a court later awarded. She would also confirm that the company owned Northstar, the aircraft routing system she had created before their marriage. "Northstar is company property," Preston said. Avery turned to the attached declaration. The metadata printed at the bottom showed that the document had first been drafted 7 months earlier, 3 days after she had shown Preston the positive pregnancy test. Her pulse did not race. It slowed. Fear often screamed. Real betrayal arrived in silence and rearranged every memory afterward. "You started preparing this the week you learned about the baby. Do not make this theatrical." She turned another page. A broad assignment of software rights had been inserted beneath language about household property. Her signature line was marked with a yellow tab. Sloan leaned closer. "It is a generous exit." Avery studied Sloan's hand resting near Preston's shoulder, familiar and possessive. Then she noticed Preston's wedding ring was gone. A pale band remained where it had been. "How long?" Avery asked. Neither answered. The baby kicked hard enough to move the ultrasound photograph against the plate. Preston glanced away first. "Sign tonight," he said, "and we keep this private. Refuse, and my attorneys will document that you have no income, no current job, and no independent housing. They will ask the court to appoint a guardian ad litem and restrict your custody until you can prove stability. You cannot take a baby because her mother stopped working during pregnancy." "No," one attorney said carefully, "but the court considers the total circumstances." Preston let the implication do the work. Avery looked at the nursery, the dinner cooling beneath the candles, and the man who had turned her pregnancy into leverage. Then she removed the yellow tab from the signature line and folded it in half. "I am not signing." Sloan's smile vanished. Preston remained still for 3 seconds before cold entered his eyes. "Then you leave with nothing." Avery looked directly at him. "No, I leave with the truth." She carried the documents into the guest bathroom and locked the door. Her hands began shaking only after the latch clicked. She photographed every page, including the dates, signature blocks, and exhibits. Then she sent the images to Maya Chun, her former college roommate, who now practiced family law in Denver. The response came less than a minute later. "Do not sign. Do not leave voluntarily. I'm calling you now." Avery answered on the first ring. For the next 20 minutes, Maya asked precise questions. Who owned the penthouse? Whose names were on the accounts? Had Preston threatened medical coverage? Was there any reason he might be desperate to secure Northstar before the divorce? Avery almost said no. Then she remembered the acquisition rumors, the calls Preston ended whenever she entered a room, and the name he had begun using with unusual caution. Calloway, Aviation. Before opening the bathroom door, Avery searched an old email account she had not touched in years. She found Graham Calloway's address beneath a message from her late father. She typed one sentence. "Do you still have the original Northstar papers?" She hesitated, then pressed send. 6 years earlier, Preston Hale owned 2 leased aircraft, 1 failing office, and enough debt to make every phone call sound like a threat. Avery remembered those nights because success had not begun with champagne, magazine covers, or glass offices. It had begun with cold coffee, unpaid invoices, and the blue glow of an old laptop balanced on her knees. She was Avery Dalton then, a 22-year-old aviation data analyst working as an independent contractor from her father's hangar in Montana. She had a gift for seeing patterns where other people saw noise. Private aircraft flew empty after dropping off clients. Fuel prices changed by the hour. Maintenance windows collided with high-demand routes. Wealthy passengers expected a plane to appear wherever they happened to be, and Preston's small company lost money every time an aircraft crossed the country without someone paying for the seat. "We need another investor," Preston said one night, pacing their apartment. Avery studied the spreadsheets covering the kitchen table. "No," she said. "You need fewer empty miles." That sentence became Northstar. She wrote the first version after midnight, while Preston slept on the couch. The system compared weather, demand, crew limits, maintenance schedules, fuel prices, and passenger routes. It predicted where an aircraft should be positioned before the next request arrived. It was not glamorous. It was precise. Within 4 months, empty leg losses dropped by more than a third. 2 aircraft became 5. 5 became 12. By the end of the second year, Hale Executive Transport was profitable. Preston kissed her in the tiny office they shared and promised the company belonged to both of them. "You are the reason this exists," he whispered. Avery believed him. That was her first mistake. Her second came when Preston said investors preferred a single public face. "Only for now," he assured her. "You hate cameras anyway." Avery agreed to remain an outside technical advisor rather than become an employee. At her father's insistence, she registered the Northstar source code under her own name, placed a verified copy in escrow with an intellectual property firm, and licensed the system to Hale Executive Transport. The license was exclusive but conditional. The company could operate Northstar, improve it, and market services built around it. It could not sell, assign, or transfer the license without Avery's written consent. Preston signed the agreement in her father's hangar with Graham Calloway as an independent witness. At the time, Graham was not a billionaire. He was a former Air Force maintenance officer trying to build a regional aviation company of his own. He and Avery had known each other since childhood, back when they repaired crop-dusting radios and argued over whose turn it was to sweep the hangar floor. "Keep a copy somewhere Preston cannot reach," Graham warned. Avery's father had agreed. Trust is not a filing system. For a while, the precautions seemed unnecessary. Then Avery's name disappeared from investor presentations. Later, it disappeared from technical meetings. Eventually, Preston began calling Northstar an internal innovation developed under his leadership. When Avery objected, he touched her cheek and smiled as if calming a child. "You are my wife. Why does credit matter between us?" It mattered more each year. Preston appeared on magazine covers beneath headlines praising his vision. He accepted awards for software architecture he could not explain. At charity dinners, strangers congratulated Avery for supporting such a brilliant husband. She learned to smile. She learned to swallow the correction before it reached her mouth. Graham was the only person who refused to play along. By then, Calloway Aviation had grown into a national competitor. Graham questioned Preston at an industry conference after Preston claimed sole authorship of Northstar. Preston came home furious. "He wants the company," he told Avery, "and he has always wanted you." The accusation was absurd, but Preston repeated it with such confidence that Avery began treating every call from Montana as a threat to her marriage. He screened messages, discouraged visits, and told her Graham was using her father to gain leverage. Little by little, loyalty became isolation. Eventually, Avery stopped answering Graham's calls. When her father died, Preston handled the travel, the estate documents, and the correspondence that followed. Avery was pregnant by then and exhausted by grief. She signed what Preston placed in front of her and believed him when he said the old licensing records had been transferred to company counsel. They had not. Preston had removed pages, intercepted letters, and hidden the original agreement because he understood exactly what it meant. But he never found everything. Months before the divorce papers arrived, Avery noticed files disappearing from her personal laptop. She copied the earliest Northstar source code, version history, registration receipts, and messages with her father onto a small blue USB drive. Then she slipped it into the torn lining of an old maternity coat. Preston believed he had erased her from the company. He had not realized the woman he pushed into silence had preserved the one record his empire could not explain away. The morning after Preston served the papers, Avery learned that he had not merely prepared a divorce. He had prepared a version of her. At 6:40 a.m., an anonymous business blog published photographs of Avery crying outside her obstetrician's office, gripping a railing after a dizzy spell, and arguing with a parking attendant who had blocked the accessible entrance. Cropped tightly, the images suggested chaos. None showed the nurse beside her, the 90-degree heat that had caused the dizziness, or the attendant moving the barrier after realizing his mistake. The article described Avery as a dependent spouse experiencing pregnancy-related emotional distress. An unnamed company source claimed Preston had spent months protecting her privacy. By 7, 3 larger sites had repeated it. At 7:15, Maya arrived at the penthouse with a legal pad, a raincoat, and no patience for intimidation. She photographed the nursery, the medication on Avery's nightstand, the stocked refrigerator, and the divorce packet. Then she demanded written confirmation that no accounts, insurance policies, or property would be altered. Preston's attorneys responded with an emergency family court petition alleging that Avery was unstable, financially dependent, and likely to flee the state with the child after birth. They requested temporary control over medical decisions and an order preventing her from leaving Colorado. "They filed before they gave you the papers," Maya said. "The hearing is tomorrow." Avery stared at the petition. Can they do this? They can ask. Asking is not winning. That afternoon, Maya negotiated a written, supervised property retrieval after Preston's company security announced that the penthouse access codes would be changed. The unit was leased through a corporate housing subsidiary, and Preston intended to use that technicality as leverage. Avery left under protest, preserving every claim to the marital home and property. 2 security guards watched from the doorway while she packed. Sloan stood in the nursery, pretending not to supervise. From the hallway, Preston spoke to an attorney. Preserve every communications approval. If anyone asks about the vendor accounts, the chain ends with her department. Sloan looked toward the door. For the first time, she did not seem victorious. She seemed to recognize a threat meant for her too. Avery folded dresses, gathered her prenatal medication, and lifted the cedar box hidden beneath winter blankets. It was empty. Her pulse stumbled. Preston had found the box where she once kept the original Northstar papers. He believed he had found the evidence. He did not know about the USB in the maternity code. "You have 5 minutes," Sloan said. Avery slipped on the old coat, pressed her fingers against the torn lining, and felt the hard plastic waiting there. Small, cold, real. "That is more time than he thinks I need," she said. The hearing began the next morning in a small courtroom with narrow windows and fluorescent lights. Preston's legal team presented the photographs, the article, and a draft psychological opinion from a physician who had never examined Avery. Maya objected before the attorney finished describing it. The judge's expression changed. "You are asking this court to rely on an unsigned draft from a doctor who has not met the patient." Preston's attorney tried to reframe the document as preliminary information. The judge refused. She denied the emergency custody request, ordered a neutral evaluation only if either party later presented legitimate medical evidence, and prohibited both sides from moving marital funds or interfering with existing health coverage. Avery was permitted to travel, provided her attorney disclosed a contact address. It was not victory, but it was air. During a recess, Avery stepped into the hallway for water. The conference room door behind her had not closed completely. Preston's voice slipped through the gap. The Calloway closing is Friday. Northstar has to be cleaned before final review. Another man answered, quieter. Their legal team keeps asking for the original developer. Then give them the assignment. They want the original license. A pause. By the time Avery understands what she signed, Preston said, she will be legally irrelevant. Avery moved away before the door opened. The acquisition was valued at $620 million. Her divorce was not the collapse of Preston's marriage. It was one line in a transaction. When the hearing ended, Maya had to remain inside to receive the written order. Avery stepped out alone with her suitcase. Preston followed with Sloan and offered the envelope containing $300. Then came the rain, the frozen cards, the canceled ride, and the silver jet descending beyond the trees. What Preston did not know was that Graham had answered Avery's email at 4:12 that morning. Yes, I have the papers. I also have every letter your father asked me to send. Avery had replied with her attorney's number and one instruction. Bring everything. Montana appeared beneath the Gulf Stream as dark pines, white fields, and narrow roads disappearing into the mountains. Avery had expected Graham to take her to a guarded estate or a glass headquarters built to impress investors. Instead, the jet landed on a private runway beside an old wooden hangar. Beyond it stood the house where her father had raised her. The porch leaned slightly to the left. Snow rested along the roof. A yellow lamp still burned above the door. Avery stopped at the bottom of the aircraft stairs. You kept it. Graham stood several feet away, leaving her space. At 40, he looked older than the man in her memories, broader through the shoulders, with silver beginning at his temples. His voice was unchanged. Your father asked me to. Inside, the house smelled of cedar, dust, and the faint motor oil that had followed her father everywhere. Childhood photographs remained on the hallway wall. Graham had not turned the place into a memorial. He had simply refused to let it disappear. In the hangar, he unlocked a steel cabinet and removed a narrow black case. Your father gave me this 3 weeks before he died. Avery stared at him. Why did you not tell me? I tried. Preston's office returned 2 certified letters. 3 others were signed for and never answered. After the funeral, he told me you wanted no contact. The absence of accusation made it hurt more. Graham opened the case. Inside lay the original Northstar licensing agreement, copyright registration records, the escrow certificate, and a stack of letters in her father's handwriting. Avery turned the pages slowly until Graham pointed to the final section. The license allowed Hale Executive Transport to use Northstar, but any sale, merger, sublicense, or transfer required Avery's informed written consent before independent counsel. Fraudulent removal of her advisory role did not automatically destroy the company, but it gave her the right to seek an injunction, suspend future updates, and demand an accounting of profits. Preston's signature appeared beneath the clause. So did hers. And Graham's. He knew. Avery whispered. From the first day, the betrayal was no longer emotional. It was structural. Preston had built his empire around an asset he did not fully own, then spent years convincing Avery she had never held the key. Graham placed a second folder on the workbench. My acquisition team found discrepancies. We paused final approval yesterday, but Preston is still planning a public signing on Friday to pressure the board and lenders. Can you stop it? Yes, but stopping the sale is different from saving the company. Avery looked through the hangar window. Hundreds of pilots, dispatchers, mechanics, drivers, and office employees depended on Hale Executive Transport. Preston had used them as walls around himself. Then we do both. Graham studied her, meaning a full independent audit, a court order preserving records, payroll and retirement accounts protected before anyone fights over equity. Northstar stays operational under a temporary license, so flights continue. He tried to take your child. I know. And you still want to protect his company? No. Avery closed the folder. I want to protect the people he placed between himself and the consequences. For the first time, Graham smiled. What do you need? Auditors he cannot buy, intellectual property counsel, a forensic examiner for the signatures, and 1 seat at the board meeting. You will have them. Avery placed the blue USB beside the original agreement. For 6 years, men had decided what her silence meant. Standing in the hangar where Northstar had first existed as pencil marks and impossible calculations, she made a different decision. The next time Preston heard her voice, there would be witnesses. By sunrise, Preston had discovered the jet. By noon, Sloan had turned it into a scandal. The first headline showed Avery boarding Graham's aircraft beneath the words, "Pregnant wife flees with billionaire buyer during divorce fight." A second article implied that Avery had secretly helped Calloway Aviation undermine her husband's company. A third described Preston as a devastated father trying to protect his unborn child. The stories contained enough truth to make the lies efficient. Avery had left with Graham. Graham's company had considered buying Hale Executive Transport. Avery had refused Preston's settlement. None mentioned the locked accounts, the false medical document, or the attempt to obtain control of Northstar through a hidden assignment. Graham placed the tablet face down on her father's kitchen table. "You do not have to read this. He wants me to answer emotionally," Avery said. "Then he can use my reaction as evidence." "So what will you do?" "Nothing publicly." For the first time, silence felt like strategy rather than surrender. While Preston performed for cameras, Avery's team followed numbers. The forensic auditors examined vendor payments, aircraft leases, executive reimbursements, and 6 years of transfers disguised as consulting fees. They found 3 shell companies tied to Sloan's brother, a Manhattan apartment purchased through a marketing vendor, and luxury travel billed as client acquisition. Then they found 6 documents carrying Avery's signature. 1 purported to assign Northstar. 2 waived compensation. 3 authorized loans she had never seen. A handwriting examiner concluded that the signatures were digitally assembled from older documents. The metadata pointed to a computer used by Preston's executive office. The most disturbing file was labeled Family Contingency. It contained the draft psychological opinion shown in court, talking points about Avery's prenatal instability, and a schedule for filing a new custody motion immediately after the baby's birth. That night, Maya received a call from Sloan's newly hired attorney. Sloan had discovered emails directing the accountants to place the suspicious payments under her authorization. Preston intended to blame her if the acquisition review failed. She wanted a formal proffer through counsel and could provide a recording. Avery agreed to listen but promised nothing. The audio began with Preston complaining about Calloway's due diligence. He described Avery as weak, Sloan as useful, and the unborn child as leverage. Then his voice became almost amused. "Once Avery signs, Northstar is mine. After that, neither woman matters." The room remained silent after the recording ended. Graham waited for Avery to speak. She placed both hands over her belly. Her daughter kicked once, strong and awake. "File for the temporary restraining order," Avery said. "Send the evidence to the board's outside counsel. And tell them I will attend Friday's meeting in person." "The signing ceremony?" Graham asked. Avery looked at the blue USB beside her father's letters. "No," she said. "The accounting." The signing ceremony began Friday at 11 beneath a ceiling of steel and glass. Beyond the transparent wall, 6 white aircraft stood in formation while cameras flashed across the polished hangar floor. A screen behind the stage displayed the words Hale Executive Transport joins Calloway Aviation. $620 million. 1 public signature away, according to Preston. The folders on the table held ceremonial copies, not operative closing documents. The acquisition still required board approval, lender consent, clean title to Northstar, and confirmation that no material fraud had occurred. Preston believed cameras could pressure cautious directors into behaving as though the deal were already done. He stood at the center of the stage, smiling for reporters. Sloan waited near the communications team, pale beneath professional makeup. She had not told Preston that her attorney was already speaking with the board's special committee. Today, Preston announced, "We secure the future of private aviation." The hangar doors trembled with a low engine roar. Every head turned. Graham's Gulfstream rolled into view and stopped behind the glass. Its black sea filled the windows like a signature. The cabin door opened. Avery stepped down alone. She wore a pale blue maternity dress beneath a dark wool coat. Her blonde hair was tied low at her neck. She carried no jewelry, no dramatic entourage, and no expression Preston could easily label irrational. Only a black document case. Maya walked beside her. Graham followed several steps behind. By the time Avery entered the hangar, the room had gone quiet. Preston came down from the stage. "You are not authorized to be here." Avery looked past him toward the signing table. Neither are you. A murmur crossed the audience. Maya handed the board chair a filed federal temporary restraining order preserving Northstar records and preventing any transfer of the software license pending a hearing. Calloway's general counsel then confirmed that the buyer had suspended the transaction after receiving evidence of disputed ownership and possible fraud. The screen behind Preston changed. The acquisition logo disappeared. In its place appeared the Northstar registration record bearing the name Avery Elizabeth Dalton, followed by the escrow certificate and original license. Avery faced the board, not the cameras. "I am not asking you to believe my marriage," she said. "I am asking you to examine your records." She presented the forged assignments, the metadata analysis, the hidden payments, and the intercepted letters. Then Maya played Preston's recording. "Once Avery signs, Northstar is mine. After that, neither woman matters." Sloane closed her eyes. Preston turned toward her. "You gave them that." His lapel microphone was still live. Sloane stepped backward. "Your emails put every transfer under my name. Because you approved the invoices. You told me to approve them." Reporters surged toward the stage. The board chair ordered the microphones cut, but the damage was already public. Preston turned to Avery. "You built an engine. I built everything around it. Without me, this company collapses." He had repeated that story until theft sounded like leadership. Avery opened the final folder. "No," she said. "It nearly collapsed because everyone was forced to protect you from the truth." The board chair announced that Preston was suspended immediately pending an independent investigation. The chief operating officer would assume temporary control under a special committee. Records were to be preserved, payroll accounts isolated, and no executive compensation paid without approval. No federal agents marched into the room. No handcuffs appeared for the cameras. Consequences in the real world moved more slowly than humiliation. But they had begun. Corporate security approached Preston. For the first time, he looked frightened. He lowered his voice as he passed Avery. "Think about our daughter. Protect her name." Avery met his eyes. "She will carry mine," she said, "until you learn how to honor yours." Outside, Graham's jet remained motionless behind the glass. It belonged to him, but everyone in the room understood that the power had entered carrying Avery's name. 5 weeks later, the first sound Avery heard after 13 hours of labor was her daughter crying. Small, furious, alive. The nurse placed the baby against her chest, and the fluorescent lights, legal filings, aircraft, cameras, and months of fear seemed to move far beyond the room. Avery looked down at pale lashes and a rose-colored mouth opening in protest. "Rose Elizabeth Dalton," she whispered. "Not Hale. Dalton. Her name. Her choice." Maya stood near the door, openly crying despite insisting she never cried in hospitals. Graham waited in the family lounge until Avery asked the nurse to bring him in. During the labor, he had delivered coffee, answered calls from counsel, and stayed out of every decision that did not belong to him. When he entered, he stopped several feet from the bed. "She is beautiful," he said. Avery looked at Rose. "She is loud. Also a Dalton trait." Avery laughed for the first time in weeks. Preston did not come to the hospital. A temporary family court order routed all contact through attorneys while paternity and future parenting time were addressed separately. Avery did not ask the court to erase him. She asked for safety and decisions based on evidence rather than wealth. Over the following months, the board restored retirement funds, paid withheld bonuses, and kept the fleet operating under a temporary Northstar license. Sloane surrendered records through a cooperation agreement. Her testimony exposed the plan Preston intended to leave under her name. 7 months after the hangar meeting, prosecutors charged Preston with offenses involving fraud, forgery, obstruction, and the false medical evidence. He pleaded not guilty. Avery read the alert once, closed it, and returned to feeding Rose. Revenge was not the life she intended to build. 10 months after the storm, the old Montana hangar held 12 engineers, one unreliable coffee machine, and a hand-painted sign, Dalton Aviation Systems. Avery had rejected Hale's offer to become permanent chief executive. "I already built one company behind someone else's name," she told the board. "The next one will carry mine." Northstar became the foundation of her firm, not its limit. She hired dismissed engineers, returning mothers, and analysts whose ideas had been used without credit. Part of every license funded housing and legal support for women trapped by financial control. Avery wanted doors opened, not gratitude. The house beside the runway was repaired by autumn. Graham replaced the broken porch boards, but left the slight tilt in the roof because Avery said her father would have hated perfection. He never asked her to move into his world. He did not use rescue as a debt. He simply kept showing up in hers, sometimes with acquisition documents, sometimes with groceries, and once with a wooden airplane he had carved badly enough to make Rose laugh. One evening, Avery stood by the kitchen window with her daughter asleep against her shoulder. Outside, Graham's silver jet waited beneath a violet sky. He entered carrying 2 mugs of tea. "My pilot says we can still make Denver before midnight," he said. "The awards dinner starts tomorrow afternoon." Avery looked at Rose, then at the cradle beside the fire. "Tell him to leave without us." Graham glanced toward the runway. "You are sure? For years, I went wherever someone else said my life was happening." She looked around the warm kitchen, the old photographs, her father's tools, and the company lights glowing through the hangar windows. "This is where it is happening now." The jet lifted into the evening without her. Avery watched its lights disappear beyond the mountains, then closed the curtain and returned to her child. An aircraft had carried her out of the storm. Evidence had returned her name, but neither had given her a home. Home began when Avery understood that dignity was not something a husband, a judge, a board, or a billionaire could grant. It was the one possession that had always belonged to her.